Hello, I'm your host, Giselle Gamby, and this is the Intuitive Pull Podcast, where together we'll embrace the plans we did not make yet, unfold businesses and lives that are so much greater in wealth in all ways than any business or life plan could ever achieve. My wish is that you make intuition your most trusted advisor. So, buckle up, get present, and let's go. It feels like Christmas to me this week because this week I've interviewed two wonderful people already, Annie McDonald and Susie De Jong. And today I interview another very dear friend of mine, Lizzie Adams, or Elizabeth Adams, who lives in the UK. You're going to fall in love with her voice. You're going to fall in love with the way she expresses herself. You're going to fall in love with her. That I know. I fell in love with Lizzie a few years ago when I met Lizzie. Thanks to Facebook, isn't it? Thanks to Facebook that we got to know each other that way, firstly. And then we shared some time together. So I'm extremely grateful for that. So Lizzie and I were just talking, and normally, as with other interviews, I kind of know where we're going to go. Like with Annie McDonald's Powerfully Sober, I know her story. I know where we're going to go roughly anyway, and the conversation unfolds. But with Lizzie said, this conversation is a mystery. And I love that. And I also felt, because I know Lizzie well and how grace is so important to her, I'm going to use Annie McDonald's words of the sacred walk. I feel like today's conversation will be a sacred walk. So welcome, Lizzie.
I have a tickle in my throat. And I'm just remembering, it was in 2011 that I found you on Facebook and just absolutely loved everything that you shared and wrote to you and wanted to work with you. And I waited, didn't I? I waited until 2018, 2019 when I took the leap and finally gave myself the pleasure, because for me it was about the unimaginable wonder and the pleasure of speaking into existence what I most would love, and having that relationship be about the joy and not the need to fix or solve anything, right? I'd done that. I'd been in process and deep diving for such a long time by the time we came together. And it always unfolded something different, especially when I wrote the book. Remember, on retreat with you, this book arrived, The Wounded Entrepreneur. And I guess what feels like I'm discovering is the process of letting go of the hard work, letting go of the striving and the effort, and allowing grace to unfold the path. And when I look back at my life, grace was always unfolding the path. And it was a matter of dropping the judgment and the shame and the blame, because I inherently knew what I loved. But I had to give it to myself first. I had to allow myself to receive it. And that's that divine feminine, right? Because, I was talking to some women recently in the US over the Roe versus Wade. And we were talking about how, especially when I was younger, I identified with my dad, right? He was this dynamic, multi-dimensional kind of man who was conquering the world, being an entrepreneur. And my mother was so depressed that I aligned myself with, I want to be like my dad. And in that, denied the feminine aspect, because I saw no value in the feminine. And so the joining of those parts of myself has been a really important journey. And through that, allowing myself to receive the lusciousness of, my family. I have 2 sons. And for the first 14 years of my eldest son's life, I couldn't fully receive him until I learned to drop the judgment, the shame, the blame, the punishment that was mostly directed to myself.
You have had a very big life, and thus the book, The Wounded Entrepreneur, was written. Another one of those plans that you didn't make. It was a conversation with Shari L, who I interviewed on the episode Calling in the New Within Ourselves, which I actually have to say is one of the most downloaded episodes. I started this podcast on the 29th of November, 2021. There's 42 episodes out there. Hers is number 39, I think, and it's one of the most downloaded episodes. And I've only released it like last week.
Wow.
So why am I talking? I got lost in the goodness and greatness of Shari. Why was I talking about Shari? Why was I bringing that in? Oh, that's right. Because it was with Shari and myself. It was our little threesome that we had a conversation, and the book, The Wounded Entrepreneur, arrived.
Yes. Yeah. From the retreat, right? From the dropping in. And so I want to acknowledge the space that you created that was actually a safe enough container to feel that rage. Because I remember actually the rage I was feeling, and it just arrived, right? What is this rage and what is this grief and where did it come from? Because I definitely wasn't feeling that before. And by being allowed to be there, nobody made it wrong. Nobody tried to smooth it over, right? I was just allowed to be in it. And that night I went to bed and I didn't go to sleep, I don't think, because the book just came and kept coming for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. By the end of the month, I was shattered because all I'd done was write.
Yes. Yes.
It was very beautiful to have that as a sort of culmination of our year together.
Yeah.
And
you said that it was through the rage and the grief that you didn't know was there that turned up in presence and in that container that we were in that retreat that we were having at that time. And through that rage and grief came greatness. Greatness. And in Shari's episode, it's entitled Calling the New Within Ourselves. And there's a part in that episode that talks about how our humanity is a gateway. It's a gateway for remembering who we really are, for honoring who we really are, for seeing parts of ourselves that are genius that we haven't yet seen or fully integrated. And that was you. That was you on that retreat where you were able to fully own and appreciate all of your very big life that has you know very well what it's like to be a wounded entrepreneur. So I'd love you to speak about that. I'd love for you to speak about your big life so that the listeners can get a feel and understanding.
Sure. I mean, I just want to preface this with an awareness that dropped in yesterday is that our humanness is sort of like we have a set of patterns that we think are unique, but actually that's part of our humanity, is that we all go through this level of sort of perception and belief and patterning. It's our heart that's unique, right? It's our hearts that are the unique things about us that you cannot substitute in any way, and that we are each so different. And part of our journey is about opening up and receiving our hearts. And we only know that when we develop relationship with ourselves. We can't, well, we might see that in reflection in our relationship with others, because it's always feeding back information that's valuable. But through the cultivation of our relationship with our own hearts, we get to take the step of courage to uncover, the real juiciness that's here for us when we say yes. And how is that relevant? So, I mean, I guess I'll start at the beginning. I was born into a fundamentalist Christian home. I was pretty miserable and unhappy. My parents had a very difficult marriage, and they moved to the west of Ireland where I grew up. So not only was I in a household that was very disturbed and unhappy, but I also had the religious conditions on top, that the messaging was around, that there's a right way to be. When I left home at 16, I left because I was like, I am not doing this religion situation. Something is not right with this. In fact, one of my strongest memories as a very young child was going, God is love, and love is all of these things. So this religion and this context makes no sense. What am I doing here? So from a very young age, I sort of set a path for myself, but I also had massive self-doubt because I didn't have any validation of what I was feeling. Everyone around me, because you can only be with the people who are in your religion, gave me the template that my parents gave me. So when I left at 16, I'm thinking I'm free now. No. Whatever, no matter what background, it could be anything, everybody, we all leave, we all grow up and realize that there are patterns and ways of being that are inherent in our dynamic, that are there to challenge us in our growth, and also there to have us take ownership and responsibility for the fact that we created it. And people go, oh, but you were just a kid. And that's true. I did feel powerless. I was just a kid. But actually, there were responses within me that I did have control over, that I didn't know I had control over. If it makes sense. That had me, one of the things I recall about early childhood is having no emotional regulation, really, and having no one who could hold that. And instead of, because we're children, we don't know how to handle that. In me, that created an even bigger acting out, which made it really difficult for my parents. Mm-hmm. Right? But I often do a process, and it's one of the key exercises I'll do with myself, or I'll do with others, is going back and owning our greatness even at that young age.
Oh, wow. I love that.
And choosing what response we have in that moment back then from that place of greatness.
So what do you say your greatness, what can you appreciate your greatness as that young child was and is?
So sensitive enough to know what was going on, and able to compassionately withdraw and find a space to be creative. My outlet was my creativity and going off and doing things by myself. And over the years of being an adult, I've had to work through the hiding that comes with that, so that I can bring it out and share it with other people, right? Because you get used to hiding.
Yeah.
Holding. So it's a process to allow people in and allow people to see and share.
Yeah.
So really my answer, when I came to London, I was just shy of 20. I'd had my first son, and it was very disapproved of. My mother actually came to see me. I was living in Holland, and she said, she was highly religious, but I wasn't. I'd left, and she said, you have a choice. You don't have to have this baby. So, but I really wanted my son, and I had actually named him 3 years prior.
Oh, wow.
And so well, I'd said to a friend of mine, I'm going to have a son and I'm going to call him Samson. And sure enough, he was born at home on the 31st of March, and I called him Samson. But instead of being able to receive him, one of the first thoughts in holding him after he was born was, I mustn't get too close to him in case something happens to him. Mm. And you know, it's amazing, the telepathy, because 2 or 3 years ago, he came to me and he said, you know, Mom, I always had this thought.
Yeah. Got shivers.
That you couldn't love me because in case something happened. And I said, well, that was the very first thought I ever had, helping you. So, you know, it's like having him, it was this process of, I was under the shame of the context in which he was born. His dad couldn't be with us because he had no papers. He was illegal. So I found myself at a very young age in a position of being on my own, having had a partner who had he was an electrician. He could have earned and provided for us with no problem, but we couldn't get the paperwork, and that's a whole other story in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, I was raising him by myself, and it was as it would be, because actually I was set up to fight in relationship, because that's all I'd known through my parents' marriage. So it was actually healthier and safer for me to be alone.
Right.
Because of the fight that I had become accustomed to. So he grew up with a very absent mother emotionally, not able to be present. Where I put all my energy was into projects. So by the age of 22, I'd come to London with no contacts, no money, with this baby, and suddenly found, and this was my second project actually, I had spotted that the UK had no information on motherhood that reflected to me what I wanted to experience. So at that time, I was really into natural childbirth, had my son at home, co-sleeping, the psychology of children, all of this stuff I was into. And there was nothing in terms of magazines or books. And I really had to dig to find some great authors. I found through that midwives like Robin Lim, who now is in Bali, and different people like that. The reason I tell you this is because through that, I then came across an American magazine called Mothering. And I called the editor and I said, I want to launch a European edition of your magazine. And she said, great, yes. And she wrote me this letter of endorsement. I mean, context-wise, it made no sense. Had she known what I was up against, I don't think she would have said yes, but she didn't know. She said yes. And then I went about making it happen. And it came to a point where I understood that I didn't have the money to print this thing. So I got endorsement from people like Sheila Kissinger, a well-known international author, who, again, I called up, having not known, explained to her what I was doing. I went to her house in Oxford. She loved the project, wrote me a letter of endorsement. Her letter of endorsement got me in the door at WH Smith to see the head of distribution, who said to me that they would stock it as long as I had a publisher. So then I went to a division of EMAP. They had a division called Excel Publishing, and I pitched them my magazine, and they wrote and said, we love it. We're not going to do it as a consultancy. We want to buy the project. We want to purchase this off of you. And then once they got it into print, it ran for 16 years. It was a best-selling title here in the UK. But I didn't receive any of the rewards of that, right? And the reason is, I went on to do other projects that brought products to the market in the UK, similar but different. And it was 3 times after that I realized, what the heck? I'm not receiving the benefit. My family is not receiving the benefit. I'm a workaholic. I work every hour. And I have no reward from any of this, even though these projects are out there, they're in magazines, they're making money for other people. What the hell is going on? And I met a mentor. I was in a lot of pain at this point. I was 29, maybe a little bit older, 30, 31. And I had 2 children by that point, right? And my youngest was just a few years old. He was just 2. Again, another situation that was, and this is the key, it's like these 2 places didn't add up. I could go out into the world and almost conquer it. But
shivers when you said that again. I could go out in the world. I could go out in the world and almost conquer it.
Yeah, but my personal life was in complete despair. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand why. There was such a big gap between who I could be out there and how other people see me and what my personal life actually looks like. Because the real truth there is that for quite a long time, when my eldest was little, we lived in absolute poverty. No holidays, no clothing, nothing, because every single penny I had went to buy train tickets to have meetings, get to the library, because there wasn't internet at that time, and I had to get to the library. I had to make photocopies of things. I was living on the breadline, and every penny I had went to try to make this impact and make my project.
And yet you walked away with nothing.
And yet I walked away with nothing. And the reason is I realized through quite a bit of work that I wasn't doing it for the money. I was doing it for the significance, to prove I was worthy enough so that I could gain belonging.
So say that again so that the listeners can really feel that one.
That the real intention was never to get the money, even though I thought it was. Rationally, I thought, once this project has got to make millions, right? So I'd go after it, convinced of my abilities, and prove myself right. But the real thing was, I was never about the money. It was about proving my significance. So I would set myself up with impossible tasks. Like most people would say to me, how did you do that? That's like, I have a job, they pay me a salary. For me, I was never interested. I don't want a job and I don't want a salary because I can conquer the world. Right? This kind of level of never giving myself any security in order to prove I was significant, in order to prove I was worthy, in order to find where I belonged. And that was my whole wounded entrepreneur setup that I enacted upon myself. And it wasn't until my son, so I went on, I had, my last project was in corporate well-being, and I would get up at 5, I'd go to bed at 1, I'd be on my laptop or in meetings or whatever all day. My 14-year-old said, I get it, Mom, I'm the sacrifice. I'm the sacrifice. And I thought, oh my gosh. So, and I think about the fact that as women, we've been kind of sold this thing that we can, we just have to work hard. But the truth is, our feminine nature isn't about working hard. So for us to create and receive what we love, it's never about working hard. It's never about the provership. And in the last 5 years, maybe a little bit more of my life, I've had easeful abundance, and I haven't worked hard. I work about a day a week, actually. I do a bit more than that, but so how do you go from a day a week having abundance?
Yes, so how?
Working every single second of the day, working really hard in provership and never having ends meet. And
so that's a really good question. Like, what were the catalysts that moved you out of workaholism and receiving nothing in return other than this false belief that you would finally be significant, therefore feel worthy and finally feel like you belong, which is never going to happen.
Oh gosh,
Because,
yeah.
right? How did you,
Yeah.
what were the catalysts that had you move from workaholism to grace?
I had to get very honest with myself and come out of my denial and my delusion. It's not that my projects were delusional.
No,
obviously,
amazing projects.
But it was that I thought that they would be the savior.
Right.
And I didn't need saving. I had a beautiful young son. You know, things were actually, I was very blessed. I had my health. He was healthy. I mean, he's a healthy young man today, and he was a very healthy child. That in itself is abundant.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And being able to play with your children and enjoy them, that's abundance. That's abundance.
Yeah.
And enjoying the moment with them.
Yes.
And I wasn't having any of that because I was like, it won't be enough until I've got this.
Yes.
So I had to own up to that postponement of happiness, because you see, I wasn't okay in myself, and I was never okay in myself because of the beliefs and the pattern that was ingrained from very early. I had to take responsibility to see it and to own that I was perpetuating it on myself, that I created the mess that I was in, not through anything that anyone else did, but through my own misunderstanding. So there was that, and there was developing a relationship with myself such that I loved myself. And that was a journey that took some years, some real years, because what I uncovered is that I had a deep self-hatred for a very long time. So I had to really get present with myself first and foremost. And then my 17-year-old, once my son reached 17, I began to realize about my vibration, my inner vibration, and how that would impact him. So that was really interesting, because what would happen is he'd come home from school and then be super abusive on me. And I'd be like, why do I have this child in my life? And we'd get into fights, we'd get into big fights. And then I started to look at, there is a teenage transition that happens, but before that, it's really about what's my inner dialogue towards myself. And I caught something really interesting. I realized that on the days when I was beating myself up internally, he'd come home and reflect it right at me.
Yes, yes.
And I blame him before I realized, thinking he's the baddie.
Yes.
Not getting that I was being self-abusive internally.
Yes.
The minute I switched that, there was nothing for him to say.
So I've got shivers again. Okay, can you say that again? Because I know that who is listening. Okay. The summary of that, because I know who's listening. There's going to be light bulbs that are going to go off here.
Right.
You realized that?
I realized that I was self-abusive. So there's an internal dialogue that we have with ourselves all the time. In fact, it's really funny because my first coach that I worked with in 2006, he introduced me to a book called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself. And I'd read the book, but I hadn't quite gotten the context of vibration and all of that. And my son at the time, who was 14, laughed. He said, I'm going to tell all my friends that my mum reads a book called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself. He thought it was hilarious. But roll on 3 years or so, and I was getting that, oh my gosh, there's this internal beratement of myself, that I'm not good enough, my life isn't good enough, what I've done isn't good enough, all this stuff. And when I began to be present, which means like the thoughts can be there, but we recognize that they're just thoughts. They're not the truth. They're just thoughts. And then we lose our attachment to them because that's not who we are, right? That's not who we are. And then I began to ask myself the question, what's the end result I'd love with my son here? And I would anchor myself in that end result, and I'd keep quiet instead of reacting to whatever was going on or however he was showing up with me. And it was a complete game changer. But the change was, instead of blaming him for his behavior, owning it myself first.
So the catalyst to that enabled you to move from that workaholism that was all that had a agenda around really wanting to belong. The catalysts were you had to get honest with yourself, that you were the one that created the mess. You developed a relationship with yourself where you loved yourself. You had awareness around that your inner vibration has an effect on those around you. And you started to choose what you would love, the end result of what you would love.
And also, I gave up control.
That one.
I gave up control because my mind and the brain is very scheming. You know, logically, we make an equation. If I do X, I'll get Y. And this is how it works. And it can be really challenging to give up control, to say that we don't have to control every aspect. And I see this in businesses, right? In businesses, there's this thing of we've all got to work really hard and we've all got to do this and it has to be done now. And, you know, and it creates a real stress in people in their central nervous system in a way that actually doesn't let them receive fully the end result of what they want to create anyway. So it's an insanity, and most businesses run on insanity and hard work and the striving and the efforting of the will, and actually the misplacement of their will. Because that's another thing I learned, that will. I thought will was about us forcing ourselves. And I learned that will is about where we put our focus. And it's the will to use our focus powerfully and correctly that gets us what we need. And that's not about being in control of the situation and being in control of other people. Even though our deluded mind will tell us it is, comes up with stories like you have to control your people, you have to do this to them and that to them, and it's all based on manipulation. It's very ripe time for transformation in all of those toxic practices that we've taken for granted. Yeah.
And so when you give up control, it's not about going into resignation and dropping the ball at all. There's a place that you orientate yourself from. Where do you orientate yourself from?
Love is, going to, for me, it's like I want to drop into my body and I want to connect with the life force that is me, the energy that runs through us, right? It's also our sexual energy, and that is not controversial. It's not about sex as in with others. It's about the life force running through us, because, you know, I've heard it said this way: we are sex, we come from sex. It's an energy that is what is animating us, and it's based on love, right? It's not a romantic love, it's just what life is. And when we really tune in, we feel it. We can feel it deep down, deep in our belly. And when we allow it, we can breathe it so that it flows and opens the whole of our body. And then we can respond to what's happening in life But when we try to control that and we lock it in places in our body, we stop the flow, and then we go numb. And being numb in a place where we can't feel ourselves, let alone what's going on out there, then we're not feeling the frequency, we're not feeling the energy of life. Then we're locked in the head, we're locked in the projection. We're back in trying to control it all.
Thank you. And I love how you worded that. You worded it as life force energy. And so now I want to go to your work, because you are a confidant. And I would love for you to share, because I know this is the work that you do with your people, with your clients. And I've heard some incredible stories about what has happened as a result of people integrating what you have integrated, about getting honest with yourself, et cetera, down to connecting with the life force within themselves. Can you tell us an example or examples of one of your most pleasurable experiences as a confidant to your clients? What happened for them? It was absolutely magical.
Well, I mean, I have this, this quite stunning story of one client who had been locked in a court case for 20 years over a property dispute. And somehow the government had managed to keep all of the investment. And it was about £250,000, maybe £500,000. And she had actually given up talking about it. Right? She brought it to the table 6 months into our work together. And so she'd done everything. She'd written all the legal letters. She'd tried to force them to give her the money. She'd done everything to try to, get them to pay her back. And it was painful. She didn't want to talk about it, but she did open up to me. And through using the energy of love, within a couple of months of that conversation, she had a full refund of all her money. So that was extraordinary. And
so extraordinary. Like, that stuff just doesn't happen.
Yeah, well, it does. It's just what are we using? What are we implementing? And you asked me about grace a moment ago. And this is the thing. It's like when we choose to get out of our own way and drop the mental, that's what allows life force, the grace that powers our life force. It's like we come into harmonic resonance with life force, with grace. That's a collective field of consciousness. It's available to us all. That's the best way to describe it. It's available to us all, as long as we are choosing to sort of drop because control is just a pattern. It's not a truth, it's a pattern. And this is about the laws, right? It's like, do we know the laws of the universe? When we think of the law, we think of the law of the land, but what's the law of the universe? And the first law is the law of mentalism, of what we think we create. So if we can drop the thinking that tells us we have to control it all, that, attaches to patterns of orientation that are actually a framework, they're like a matrix. When we drop that and just come into the body, our home, this is our home here while we're in our physical form, it sort of allows that orchestration to happen. And so what I see happened with that client is that she came from a place of love, and it was felt, it was received, and then the people receiving it acted in her favor.
It's such an extraordinary example, that one, isn't it? I
Isn't
find
that
that
right?
so
Very different
extraordinary.
way of operating in the world. I mean, I guess the thing is, when you say being a confidant to people, it's, I first had to be a confidant to myself and see the ability that even when I'm in tension and vulnerability, and even if I'm in grief, I can be present.
So true.
Right? It's not about blocking out the negative. It's not about hiding or trying to protect ourselves and do up, it's all good, or being overly positive. It's just about receiving what's here. Okay, I'm angry, or, you know, I'm sad, or I'm in grief. And instead of, because my habit for the longest time was to lock all the doors. So when my son was growing up, I said I was emotionally not present. I would literally, I'd be in so much pain. I would force him to just be on his own in his bedroom, which is something I experienced regularly growing up. And I'd go into my room and I'd write for hours to try to cathartically get, find relief. And these days, I don't need to do any of that. I haven't done any of that for years, because if there's pain, I'm just like, okay, I can breathe here in this. And it's amazing what happens when you choose to be present, even if you're in pain, because people still come to you. They still see you and want to interact with you. And that's also just amazing, that, when we're present with it. But if we're not present with it, it's almost like we create an invisible barrier, and then people will completely try to avoid us because they feel the funkiness of it. What is that funkiness? And then they move away. It's really curious.
Well, there's your demonstration of your piece. One of the catalysts to moving from wounded entrepreneur to grace is the inner vibration. The inner vibration of someone who doesn't want to look at or walk towards what's uncomfortable within them. It repels people, whereas someone who accepts and embraces whatever they're present to, that acceptance creates, it's attractive, which is the antithesis of what we think. We think that that's a weakness. Like, if I'm to feel my grief or my anger or my rage or my sadness, then something's wrong with me. And that's a weakness, and I need to be strong all the time. Whereas what you're saying is actually, when you can embrace all of your humanity, it's a really powerful thing to do. I don't know if there's something that you want to say in your words. I feel like you're much more eloquent at talking about this than I am.
No, it's just being able to, one of the things that really helped me identify all of this was studying and reading about the matrix of orientation, the set of beliefs that we all have, as that's common across all humanity. It doesn't matter what culture, what background you come from. Being able to identify, I'm doing that. That's how I'm set up. Just having that awareness really helped. And so when I work with clients, I tend to take them through that type of foundation. And this is interesting as well, because my business has changed quite a bit this last year. I don't know whether you want me to talk about it.
Yes, go for it. Because I'd love people to be able to connect with you.
This goes to what you were saying about following the intuitive pull, because what was happening in my business is that January would come, people would sign up, and that they would stay with me for the year. And, I'd be working with, just more than a handful of people for the year. And that was great. And I realized I wasn't really giving myself space within that a lot of the time. I was putting, my own life on hold to be available and to be present, because one of the dedications I have when I work with people is I really want to be there for them in walking beside them on their journey. And this year, everything changed. And it was really curious because I had begun to see something else in my business. I'd begun to see that I take people through the same fundamental framework like everyone. And that instead of repeating myself, I could actually create some trainings that people can access themselves.
Perfect.
And take themselves through those basic trainings and then come to me once they wanted more. So the last 6 months, that's what I've been doing. I've been creating the basic foundation of an online training, and I've never done it before. So the rational mind goes, well, first of all, this is a really interesting point for business, because often when we have success in a certain way and something slows down or changes, we can try to force it to work how we know that it should be working. But by January, I was in a place of, I no longer force. That's not how I'm living my life. And what felt the most natural pull for me was to create this training. Even though I had no experience, even though there were lots of technical things I don't understand, it just felt right. And in January, I thought I had the whole picture. And as the year progressed, I realized that there were lots of little pieces that I needed. And synchronistically, really, synergistically, I happened upon these pieces to the point where, I'm just about to put this out there in the world.
How exciting. How exciting. Well, when I publish this episode, maybe you'll be ready to give me a link to put in the show notes. Yeah, very exciting. Very exciting.
I share it because it's like, I guess the lesson there is about choosing to allow ourselves to be in the unknown and follow what's calling us, rather than sticking to a formula or a strategy that supposedly is the right way. Because if my client who had the money back on her property had stuck to the formula, she probably would have either forgotten about it, like buried it, never spoken about it again, or she would have hired some heavyweight people and spent even more money trying to get
exactly.
And so that puts her in the fight. And when we're in fight, well, that's a vibration. What are we creating? What's it leading to? So really, it's all about energy, isn't it? And our energy is seated in the first law, the law of mentalism. In terms of what we think, we then create.
I feel like this particular episode with you, Lizzie, is like a workshop in itself. I can just imagine, I am actually imagining people listening to this episode and hearing what you say. Maybe they've heard it before in a different way and they're hearing it through you and they're ready to hear it. And the symbol that I keep on having throughout this conversation is I just see light bulbs going off. See light bulbs going off, which is what happens when we're in your presence, because your presence liberates people. Of course, there needs to be participation by the other, but your presence liberates people. So I'm just really making, this was a mystery, right? This was a mystery. And I feel that what has unfolded is an opportunity, or not even an opportunity. I feel like what has unfolded is an experience of light bulbs going off, such that your presence has liberated people.
Thank you. Especially because freedom is my highest value.
Of course.
Being free of the prisons that we put ourselves in and that we put other people in is so important to my heart. Yes.
I would like to, well, first, actually, before I go there, is there anything else that you would like to say? I know that your intention was you felt like, you wanted this conversation to be inspiring and encouraging. Is there anything else that you feel to say to meet that end result?
I guess the only thing is that if people listening feel called to embark on their own journey and enter the mystery, even if they're afraid, that to go for it, because it's worth it. It's so worth it. I can't tell you how abundantly purposeful and nourishing it is to give to yourself. And even if that means working with another person to help you and support you, because that's been an invaluable part of my journey along the way, is having coaches and guides and mentors. And investing in that has been invaluable because it expedites us in our growth and in the depth of our being. So that's something I've always valued for myself, to give to myself. And I would encourage anyone who may not yet know the way for themselves to have that level of support in their own journey.
Yeah, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And finally, I've done this with a few people that I've interviewed recently, and you probably have listened to those episodes where I ask at the end, or I give the opportunity for that person to make a declaration. Yeah, and I feel I didn't do that this week with the other two people, but I feel to do that with you. So take your time, yeah, or not.
I won't feel into that. I feel like the devotion, the dedication is around the freedom to really live my full potential and to champion that in others too.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And also I'm going to do a little addendum PS moment here. I'm doing everything that I can for Lizzie to come to Croatia on retreat with us and be co-facilitator with Shari and I. So I'm just going to put that out there.
It's inviting people to join Croatia shortly.
Yeah.
You know, listening to this, and maybe you're already on my list. That's something I'm sending out to people shortly, and I would love to be part of it.
Yeah, as I would love for you to be part of it. And to actually meet you in the flesh for the first time.
I've known you all these years.
Yes.
Haven't quite made that happen, and I would love that. That would be very magical for you for being with you and being with Shari. I have absolutely loved her time with you in her interview, and have listened to it quite a few times.
Thank you so much for your generosity today, and for championing freedom. And for showing us that we don't have to be workaholics, and also for championing an awareness that has us see potentially why we do what we do. And sometimes we're not doing it for the reasons that we think we do it. And when we have that awareness, everything can change. Thank you for championing the way for us, where really
such a point.
Such a good point.
That we can go for things that are not a fit for us because it's what we've been told is acceptable. Another thing. And it doesn't fit us. It's like being told to wear a spacesuit like it's yours. So so worth being on the journey to find what does fit. So thank you for being actually connected, because it's been a really powerful, you have been a really powerful lead for me.
Thank you. Such an honor. Thank you. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode or previous episodes, I would so appreciate you sharing the love and letting your family, friends, and colleagues know about this podcast, because the only way that it's going to get out there is if we use word of mouth, the good old word of mouth. So I have my hands in appreciation for you, for those who have already been sharing the love. And should this part of the podcast inspire you to share amongst your network, I really appreciate you. Also, I've been saying that I am also returning to my first love, which is writing. So if you would like to receive me in your inbox every week, there is a link in the show notes where you'll be able to subscribe, and I look forward to writing to you. Have an incredible week. Thank you.